Hello students, welcome to today's math lesson in our Saxon Math book series. Today we're going to be taking a look at lesson 94, which is entitled Writing Fractions and Decimals as Percentages. This would be part 2 of that particular lesson. The lesson itself is going to be found starting on page 488, so if you want to go ahead and open up your books to page 488 and kind of follow along, I've got some examples here up on the board. So to start with, we have talked about before how to write fractions as percentages. And anytime you can write a fraction as percentage, remember the one thing we want to try to get is we want to try to get this denominator right here. If we can get this to be 100, because we know that the word percent means out of 100. Anytime you get this denominator to be 100, then whatever the top number is, that's going to be your percent. We've talked about that in the past. So we have a fraction here, 3/5. And so what I want to do is I want to multiply both of these numbers, the numerator and the denominator, by some number that's going to make the bottom number 100. So I want to make sure that my bottom number over here is going to be 100. And so I got to say to myself, what number would I multiply 5 by to get 100? And that would be 20. So what we do is we're going to multiply the denominator by 20. And so if we multiply the denominator by 20, we got to multiply the numerator by the exact same number. So we're going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator, both of them by 20. And so when we do that, we have 3 times 20, which is going to give us 60. And so now that my fraction is 60 over 100, I know that that answer is going to be 60%. And I want to make sure to put my percentage symbol on there for labeling purposes. Okay. We can do the same thing with this other fraction here. We've done, again, we want to figure out what are we going to multiply the 25 by. We want to figure out something that we're going to multiply that 25 by where the bottom number is going to be 100. So if I take 25 times what number is going to equal 100? That's going to be 25 times 4. So I'm going to multiply that denominator by 4, which means we're going to multiply the numerator by 4 as well. And so I'm actually multiplying both numbers by 4/4. And by doing that, 6 times 4 is 24. And so that right there tells me I got 24 over 100. So my percentage is going to be 24%. Okay. This is stuff we've talked about before in the past. Now, the thing about today's lesson is we got to remind ourselves that the word percentage means out of 100. We got to remind ourselves that it means the word out of 100. Because when we are trying to change anything, whether it's a fraction or a decimal, what we're trying to do to a percentage, we are trying to put 100 into the number. We're trying to make the number bigger. And you know through your study of arithmetic that when you want to try to make a number bigger, you're either going to add or multiply. So in this particular situation, we're going to multiply because we're trying to put 100 into the number, whether it's a fraction or a decimal. So what we're going to do now, taking a look at it at a different view, is we're going to multiply by 100. So we're going to do the exact same problem we had just a minute ago, where I take 3/5, and now instead of trying to get the bottom number to be 100, all I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take the 3/5, and I'm going to multiply that by 100, just the number 100. Now, whenever you multiply a fraction times a whole number, we want to change them where they're both fractions. And if you remember from a previous lesson, and you can change any whole number in the world by simply just putting it over 1. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3/5, I'm going to multiply by 100 over 1. Now, you can multiply if you want to. I'm always a fan of trying to reduce before you multiply, so that way your numbers aren't quite so big. And I'm looking at 5 and 20, and I know that I can divide both 5 and 100. Excuse me, I think I said 20, but 5 and 100, I can divide both those by 20. Or I go from by 5, that's going to give me the number 20. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to divide before I multiply. So I'm going to take 5, divide by 5, and I'll cross it out, make it a 1. And then I'm going to make this 100. I'm going to turn that into a 20 because I know that 100 divided by 5 is 20. And now I can go ahead and multiply across. And here I've got the top numbers. I'm going to take 3 times 20, which again is 60. And then if I multiply the bottom numbers across, I have 60 over 1. And so I know that that number is 60%. So I got the exact same answer that I did on the previous page, but just looking at it in a different length or a different light. I bring that up because sometimes when you multiply fractions, you're not going to be able to turn that bottom number into a 100. Say, for example, I've got this fraction here, 1/3. I don't know of any number, or at least a whole number that is, that I can multiply 3 by to get 100. So I don't want to do the traditional way of trying to figure out what number would I multiply the numerator and then the denominator by to try to get 100, because I can't do that with the denominator. So I'm going to take a look at what I just learned a minute ago, where instead I'm going to try to put 100 into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both. I'm just going to multiply by 100, and technically I'm going to multiply by 100 over 1. So now I have two fractions here. You're noticing there's nowhere that I can reduce before I multiply. So I'm just going to multiply across. Now I have 1 times 100, which is going to give me the answer 100. And now I've got 3 times 1, which is 3. And so now what I have to do is I have to divide. And when I divide, I will probably get a remainder, and I'm going to take that remainder and write the remainder as a fraction. So if I put the 100 inside the box, like we've done before, and put the 3 out front, I'd say how many times can the 3 go into 1? Can't do it. How many times can the 3 go into 10? That'd be 3 times. And so that's 9 there, and I subtract. I get 1 left over, bring that 0 down. How many times can 3 go into 10? Well, I just established it a minute ago that it's 3. If I do that one more time, it's a 9, subtract. I get 1 left over, okay? I can't bring any more numbers down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the remainder, which is 1, and write that as a fraction. And the 1 would actually become the numerator. So I'm going to write 33 because that's my whole number. And the number 1 is going to become the numerator, so I put that right there. And then the denominator is always the number that you're dividing by. And since I divided by 3, I'm going to put the 3 right there. And now I'm going to put my percentage sign in here. And so my answer, 1/3, is going to be 33 1/3%. So it is possible that you could have a mixed number in with your percentages. So not every single one of your percentages are going to be nice whole numbers like they had before. I've got another problem here. I got 3/8. Again, I can go ahead and do my mathematics, and I don't think there's anything that I can multiply 8 by to get 100, or at least a whole number that is, that I can get it to be 100. So if that's the case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to multiply this by 100 over 1. Okay. Now, I can reduce before I multiply because I want to make these numbers a little bit smaller. I don't necessarily want them to be too big. I can divide both 8 and 100. I can divide both those numbers by 4. I'm going to try to make it a little smaller so I don't have to worry about multiplying quite so big. So if I divide both of these numbers by 4, 8 divided by 4 is going to be 2. So I'm going to replace that with a 2. And then I'm going to take this, and that's going to become 100 divided by 4. That's going to become a 25. So now what I want to do is multiply my new numbers here. I got 3 times 25, which is going to give me the answer of 75. And then I'm going to take 1 times 2, which is 2. And so now what I'm basically going to do is I want to take 75 and I want to divide that by 2. So I can go ahead and put the 75 in my box, put the 2 out front. 2 goes into 7 3 times, so I put the 3 there, and that's a 6. And I go ahead and subtract. I get 1 left over, bring the 5 down. How many times can 2 go into 15? That'd be 7, because that's 7 times 2 is going to give me 14. So I got 14, and I subtract that, and I got 1 left over. Notice there's no more numbers to bring down. So what I want to do is I want to change this into a mixed number. So my 37 is the whole number, so I put 37 there. Now the numerator, again, is going to become, is the remainder. So the remainder goes right where that numerator is, and the number that I'm dividing by, which this time I'm dividing by 2, I'm going to put that down below. So my answer right here is going to be 37 1/2%. Okay, so a little different than what we've done in previous lessons. This is the reason why they call this part 2, because not every single one of your fractions are going to become are nice whole numbers for answer for percentages, and that's okay. We can also do this with decimal numbers. Again, if I'm trying to change these numbers into decimal numbers, I'm trying to put 100 into them. So I'm going to multiply each one of these by 100. So if it's a decimal number, which is 1 2/10, I'm just going to multiply by 100. Now, the nice thing is I don't have to worry about changing these into fractions because they're already kind of whole numbers or decimal numbers to begin with. But we have studied this before, where, remember, if I have the number 100, what I want to do is just ignore these two zeros for a moment. I'm going to underline them. I'm going to ignore the two zeros, and I'm going to take 1 2/10 times 1 is 1 2/10. So I'm going to put the 1 and the 2 there. But now the number of zeros here is going to tell me how many places to move the decimal point. And since I'm multiplying, I want to make the number bigger. So I want to move the decimal point to the right in order to make it bigger. If I moved it to the left, I'd be making it smaller. That's division. So I want to do multiplication. I'm going to move the decimal place 2 places over to the right. So I go 1 place here, and then I put another place right here. Notice I have a gap here. So wherever my gap is, I'm just going to put a 0 there. And so you should see my number now is going to be 120%. Make sure we get that percentage symbol in there because we are changing these into percentages. Same is true for this number here. I got 4 hundredths. Again, multiply that by 100, excuse me. And so when I do that, 4 tenths times 1, again, ignore the two zeros. 4 tenths times 1, yes, this is an X. I know it's kind of a goofy looking X there, but 4 hundredths times 1 is 4 hundredths. So I can just go ahead and put the 4 there. I don't necessarily have to put the 0 out front because when I move the decimal, it's going to kind of eliminate anyways. The two zeros here tells me to move it 2 places to the right. So I got 1, 2, and there goes the decimal point right there. So that means my answer is going to be 4%. It would not be wrong, students, if you did write point, if you wrote 0.04%, but you do have to make sure that that decimal is right there. If you put it somewhere else, it's definitely going to be in the wrong answer. Sometimes when you change the decimal to percentage, it's going to remain a decimal number. Take, for example, this problem here. I have 424 thousandths. If I'm going to change it into a percentage, I want to put 100 into it. So I'm going to multiply that by 100. Okay, like I've been doing before, the number 100, ignore the two zeros. 424 thousandths times 1 is 424 thousandths, okay? But now what I want to do is I'm going to bring the zeros back, and I'm going to move this 2 places over to the right. Just 2 places because there's 2 zeros here. So when I move it once and I move it twice, the decimal is going to stop right there. So that means my answer, I'm going to put a decimal point right there. That means my answer is going to be 42 4/10%. So sometimes when you go to change decimals into percentages, you will still have a decimal number inside your percentage, and that's just fine. It works well that way. Now, what about mixed numbers? Mixed numbers, there are actually 2 ways that you can change mixed numbers into percentages. I'm going to show you both ways, and you can choose which one you feel is a little bit easier. I just want to show you a couple different ways. You're noticing I have 2 3/5. I wrote it twice down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this by 100. So the first thing I would do is anytime you have mixed numbers, you want to change these into improper fractions. And just to review how to do improper fractions, you take whatever the denominator is and multiply by the whole number. And so you can take 5 times 2, and 5 times 2 is 10. And then take that answer and then add whatever your numerator is. So I go 10 plus 3. So this gives me 13 fifths. So the first thing I want to do is change that into an improper fraction, which I just did. Now what I want to do is I want to multiply this by 100. And I'm going to multiply it by 100 over 1. Okay. Then I could go ahead and reduce. I can divide both the 5 and the 100. I can divide both those numbers by 5. And so this now becomes a 1, and this would become a 20 because that 100 divided by 5 is 20. And now I just need to multiply across. And the good thing is, you're noticing that the bottom is 1 times 1, which is 1. That means whatever the top number is, that's going to be the percentage. And I'm going to take 13 times 20 if I ignore the 0 right now. 13 times 2 is 26. Now bring the 0 back, add that onto there. So the answer is going to be 260 over 1. So that means my percentage is going to be 260%. So that's one way to do it right there. One way is change it into an improper fraction, multiply by 100, reduce before you multiply if you can, and then get your percentage. Another way to do this is to kind of just separate these into 2 separate numbers. The number, if you have 1, the whole number 1 is equal to 100%. So anytime you have a number 1, that is going to be 100. If I have two of them, that's like having two 100s. So I already know that this whole number 2 here is 200%. I already know that this 2 is 200%. If that whole number was 4, that means this would be 400%. If this whole number was 7, I would have 700%. So already I've got that number 2 is 200%. I know that so far. And I also look over here, I know that my answer, I had a 2 in the hundreds place here. So I know that's 200%. Now, just take 3/5 and then multiply that by 100 over 1. Again, like we just did a minute ago, we can reduce that. This becomes a 1, divide both these numbers by 5. That becomes a 20. And if I do my math right here, 3 times 20 is 60. So this right here, so the 2 is 200%. The 3/5 is 60%. Now I'm just going to combine those two numbers together. And again, it should get me the same percentage, which it did. So students, you can decide how you want to do this. If you want to change it in improper fraction multiply, great. So that's awesome. Reduce before you multiply. If you want to split it into two different parts, you know that this is 200% and then just find 3/5. That's fantastic too. Either way you do it, you should be getting the same answer. Again, we do the same thing here. I'm just going to do another example of what we just did a minute ago. Let's change these. Let's do two different ways that we had it before. This is 4 and 1/6. So let's change these into improper fractions. 6 times 4 is 24 plus 1. This would be 25/6. So this would be 25/6 as an improper fraction. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply that by 100 over 1. Now the temptation is, oh, this is 25 and that's 100. Let's divide both of these numbers by 25. No, you can't do that, because whenever you reduce before you multiply, remember, one of the numbers has to be on top and the other one's got to be on the bottom. So don't reduce these two numbers, but the 100 and the 6, both of those can be divided by 2. I know it doesn't make it that much smaller, but it does make it smaller nonetheless. So if I divide both these numbers by 2, this would become a 3. And if I divide the 100 by 2, that's going to change that to a 50. Okay. And then I can take this. I know that this bottom number is going to be 3. And so I take 25 times 50. If I cross out that 0 over right now, it's like if I have 5 quarters, that's $1.25. So I know that 25 times 5 is 125. And then I'm going to add this 0 onto that. So that'd be 1,250. Okay. And then I'm going to have to do a little dividing here. So 1,250. And I'm going to divide that by 3. So there is a little bit of work involved with some of these. Not a lot, but there is some work involved with some of it. 3 goes into 1, can't do it. 3 goes into 12. Well, that is going to be 4 times, which is 12 there. So I subtract that. I get a 0 left over. That's good. So I bring the 5 down. 3 can go into 5 one time. So it'd be a 3. Subtract that. That's going to be a 2. Then bring the 0 down. 3 now can go into 26 times, because that would be 18 for this answer here. So I subtract that and I get 2 left over. So now I want to write all this. Oops, let's undo that problem right there. Oops, I'm having fun here. Well, I'm going to bring that back here. Where is my eraser? It's fun to do this right here. I'm going to have an eraser. Mr. Johnson's having a lot of fun making messes here. But that's okay. That's what happens when you record the way we do. So we're doing good stuff here. All right. So now the answer was 416. So I have 416%, but I have a remainder left over. Remainder is 2. That becomes the numerator, and the denominator is the number we divide by, which is a 3. So this would be 416 and 2/3%. And so this is what the percentage would be. If you did it the other way, again, we know that this whole number is a 4, so that means that represents 400%. Okay, and now all we would do is we would take the 1/6, and then we're going to take the 1/6, and then we would multiply that by 100 over 1, which a minute ago we just reduced. This was a 3, this was a 50. So now we have 50 over 3, and then we do our dividing. And I'm not going to divide it just for sake of time, but I'm sure that when we divide this, we're going to get that 16 and 2/3. So again, Either way you do it, this would be our answer right here, 416%. You might get some problems that are word problems. And so what you want to do is write the fraction and then change it into percentage. So here's our word problem here. It says 20 of the 30 students on the bus, they're girls. What percentage of the students on the bus were girls? Well, if it's 20 of the 30 students on the bus are girls, I can go ahead and write that as a fraction, 20 over 30. 20 girls, 30 students on the bus. Now, before I multiply, what I would do in this situation is anytime you can reduce your fraction here before you do anything, I would do that. You could take 20 over 30, divide both those numbers by 10. If I divide both those numbers by 10, what I'm doing is I'm kind of making the fraction a little bit smaller. That way I don't have to have quite as big numbers to multiply with. So now this becomes 2/3. So now I have 2/3. Now take that 2/3 and multiply that by 100 over 1. I don't think there's anywhere I can reduce in this situation because the 2 and the 100 can't reduce. They're both on top. So I would take the 2 times 100, which is going to give me 200. Okay, and then I'm going to have that 3 times 1, which is 3. And then what I do is take the 200, and then I'm going to divide that by 3. So the 3 goes in 2, can't do it, no number there. How many times can 3 go into 20? That'd be 6 times, which is going to give me my 18. And I subtract, and I have 2 left over. Bring another 0 down. Well, I just figured out that's going to be a 6 there. And so this is 18 again, and I subtract, I get 2 left over. Nothing else to bring down. So the percentage, the number of girls that are on that bus right now would be 66, and the remainder is 2. Then we're divided by was 3, so it'd be 66 and 2/3 percentage. There's your percentage. If you look at your practice set, I was looking them over. Really, the only problem I saw in the practice set would be letter Q, if you want to take a look at that one real quickly. The word problem says, what percent of a yard is a foot? And that can be kind of confusing, but we got to remember our conversions. Hopefully we know by now that there are 3 feet in 1 yard. So it says, what percentage of a yard, and the first number would be a yard, and I only have 1 yard, that's it, is a foot. And how many feet are there in a yard? 3. So this is just a fancy way of writing what is 1/3 as a percent. What percentage of a yard is 1 foot? So there's 3 feet in 1 yard. Okay, so when we multiply that, we just multiply that by 100 over 1. And then we get that we have 100 over 3. And then we just simply divide. We have the 100, and we would take that, divide by 3. 3 goes into 1, can't do it. 3 goes into 10. That'd be 3 times, which is a 9. And we subtract, get 1 left over, bring the 0 down. 3 goes into 10, again, 3 times, which is 9. Subtract that, you get 1 left over. And so now I'm left with my percentage, which is 33. The whole number is 33. The remainder is the numerator. The number I divided by is the denominator. So that would be 33 and 1/3%. So there you go, boys and girls. Congratulations. I just gave you an answer on one of the problems. But sometimes people have a question on that one. Hopefully this helped you understand how to do this particular lesson. If you need to go back and take a look at some of the examples, please do. There are a lot of practice set problems on this particular lesson. So your assignment is going to be pages 490 and 491. I'm going to ask you to do letters A through 13. If you have any questions anytime, please, students, don't hesitate to reach out and ask for questions. I'm here to help wherever I can. That's all I got for this lesson. Until we do our next lesson, we'll talk to you later.